I said, how do you know if a punchline works? And he says, you don't know until you try it out in front of a live audience.
Hello, and welcome to the show. Welcome to the Creative Mindset Podcast. My name is Isolde Trachtenberg, and I'm thrilled you're joining me today. In this show, we explore how to live your exciting, creative, and most fulfilling life. Hello, and welcome to the show. This is Isolde Trachtenberg, and I am thrilled to welcome you to the Creative Mindset Podcast. As you know, I am a brand new stand-up comic. I've decided to take a stand-up comedy class and see where I can go with it. It's really fun, and I'm having a great time. And what's even better for you is that several of my castmates, we're not in a play, classmates, have decided that they are going to graciously allow me to interview them and their process of becoming stand-up comedians as well. It's a way of looking at stand-up comedy and also at the process, the creative process, and what it takes to not only get up there, but to do the writing to begin with. And today I have several guests. I'm very excited to introduce you to the first guest, Anthony Renda, and I'm going to let him tell you a little bit about what he's doing. Anthony, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. So basically, growing up as a kid, I was, the youngest of three in an Italian household. I was always, the one that veered to the left, the crazy kid. I was playing around the house, used to break things, especially my mom's marble porcelain. So I was always getting scolded at by both parents, especially my mom in that loud voice. And as I was growing up, I always did outlandish and outrageous things, and I always thought I was humorous and funny in a way, especially everyone thinks that. And when I was growing up, I used to watch some comedians that, I used to, role model and idolize. Eddie Murphy was one of the first one I can take off the top of my head, especially when he came out with his with Delirious, and he would come out, his Michael Jackson outfit, and he'll talk about, how the Italians, when they saw Rocky, all of a sudden they thought they were Rocky Balboa. His encounter with Michael Jackson, because he would say things about celebrities, and Mr. T and Michael Jackson wanted to beat him up, and he was scared of Mr. T, but Michael Jackson, I could take him. So I thought Eddie Murphy was like, wow, this guy's awesome, so humorous. Then, when it comes to career, I was a high school teacher. I taught history. I taught mostly global history. In the middle of my lectures, I would always tell a joke to my students. They would laugh. So I found myself to be funny, even if it was my only laugh, only had a couple laughs. So, through the years, I said to myself, I'm no longer teaching. I did it for 13 years now. I'm a personal trainer. I said, since my schedule's a little open, let me try these open mics. And there was, I was on a date actually on Tinder, and we went to an open mic, and there was like 30 performances, and one after another. They had like 5-minute sets, and I was watching it with a girl I was dating at that time, and I didn't find them really funny. Maybe I chuckled or laughed once or twice. So after the performance, I asked the host, the DJ, I said, how do you get on, stage, on the venue? He says, all you got to do is just sign up and buy an item the bar offers you, and you go on. Next thing you know, the following week, I started doing open mics, several times at this place in Bushwick in Brooklyn. In Bushwick, it was called Platform, and that was about 19 months ago, and I was obsessed with it, and I've been doing it consistently since then.
Wow. So what brought you from doing open mics and being consistent in performing to taking this stand-up class? What are you getting out of the class that's enriching your stand-up comedy?
Okay, like I stated before, like when I would teach, if I was teaching about Rome or ancient Greece or about, exploration age, I would always say jokes or like funny stories, to grasp my students' interests. So I always thought they were funny, and I said, you know what, if I did this on stage or in front of an audience, whether small or big, they'll get some laughs too. So, and seeing that open mic, those 30 performers or whatever it was, I didn't think they were that funny. I said, I could do this. I could be more funny and more humorous. And then I realized once you get on stage, you thought you were funny. You really aren't funny. All right, and you got to write like a writing style. You can't just jot things down on a piece of paper. You got to make it simple. You have to have a setup and a closing. You got to read it several times. Editing, stream of consciousness. Because the initial time you write something, it could be going to the corner bodega and you tripped over the sidewalk, and you tripped over a. Luckily, you hit your head on a mattress that was on the floor that someone was throwing out. And you thought it was funny, but the original first time you write it, it wasn't funny. But if you add more comments and if you shrink it down, editing, trimming it, changing maybe some of the logistic scenes of it, it becomes more funnier.
So the editing process that you're talking about, what is yours specifically like? How do you get to the heart of your joke when you're writing jokes?
That's a very good question. Like I said, I'm no expert. I would consider myself at the novice level. Doing it 19 months, approaching. I'm doing it consistently. I haven't missed a week. So as repetition goes on, like with anything, playing a musical instrument, performing a sports, skill, you get better and better. It becomes more effortless. So what I say to myself, I ask myself a series of questions. First of all, don't make it too complex. You're not doing a sermon. You're not a priest or a medical doctor talking about a medical procedure. Make it simple. And ask yourself some questions. Is this funny? Is this really funny? Let me dig a little deeper. Let me find some, those peeling those onions in that onion. Maybe the first layer is a little funny. You peel the second, third. Usually by the fourth, fifth layer, it is pretty funny. So that stream of consciousness they use in acting and improv. So I say, keep it simple. Dig deep. Really think about it. Is it really funny? Is it really, really funny? Ask yourself that question and be your worst critic. Would I laugh at it? Would the audience laugh at it? So that's my process, basically.
That's terrific. So I love the idea of peeling the onion, and I also love the idea, even though it could be a little bit scary, of going, if I heard this joke, would I think it's funny? So changing perspective sounds like it's something you do, looking at a different point of view. When you're doing that, when you're delivering your jokes, do you ever change your delivery on learning more about it or on looking at your own editing process? So, for example, open mic to open mic, will you change how you deliver a joke? And if so, what makes you change your delivery?
That's a very good question. What I could say, honestly, is that if you're a comedian, know why you're doing it, and pick at least 3 to 4 people that you idolize. You love their delivery, their style. I love Sebastian Maniscalco, who's Italian, because I can relate, because I grew up in an Italian household. I love how he has those facial expressions. He changes his pitches, his tones. Eddie Murphy, because he's so animated. So I'll pick anywhere between 2 and 3 comedians that I like, and I'll try to emulate their styles, their deliveries. And of course, you don't want to make it your own. You don't want to be, a plagiarist, even though we do take techniques and tips from others. So I try to add my own, my aggression or my brash personality, being from Prince and Hers. So you should review your material, your content before going on stage, at least 3 to 5 times in front of a mirror. I'm getting to that point. I am very last minute. I procrastinate. I'll write it out and I'll read it to myself. But I want to get to a point where I read it out loud, each word, and I might change the volume. I might add some emotion, some aggression, some love, some sincerity, some softness. So you got to see where that works in your jokes. So the delivery, you might say it once, like, oh man, if I said it louder, or I changed my tone, or I added some kind of like laughter, or changed my facial expression. So through those revisions and saying it, at least, you don't have to go crazy and do it 1,000 times or 100 times. I don't believe in being obsessive, but I think 3 to 5 works for me. What works for you might be a little bit different. It works for me.
Anthony, thank you so much for giving your tips and ideas. especially since I think as part of this class, you are the most experienced stand-up comedian because nobody else has had 19 months. Most of us are ranked beginners, so it's really wonderful to hear your perspective, and also from all of the open mic nights that you've done, how you've changed the way you do things and your process. So I thank you so much, Anthony, for being part of the show today. And I'm really looking forward to welcoming back Brittany Raper and also, oh my goodness, I forget his name. I'll talk about that in a minute. Thanks again, Anthony.
Thank you, my pleasure. Good luck, and I hope you learned something.
Hey, I'm back. This is Isolde Trachtenberg with the Creative Stand-Up. Why did I say Creative Stand-Up? I don't know. It's the Creative Mindset Podcast. See, I've got stand-up on the brain. It happens. It's really funny because before the break, I was going, I'm going to introduce you to Tom. And then I realized I had forgotten Tom's last name. So I'm really glad I didn't try to figure it out. I'd like to welcome Tom Fickle to the show. Tom is another student in the stand-up comedy class with Chris Griggs. We just finished week 4, so we only have 2 weeks to go, which is super exciting, and then we have our student show. So, Tom, I'd like to welcome you to the show, and I'd love it if you could tell me a little bit about what brought you to stand-up comedy.
So I think as a kid, I always idolized stand-up comedians. Some of Pee Wee Herman's early stuff on HBO Comedy, Bob Nelson, Eddie Murphy, all those kind of comedians, Richard Pryor. But I never really saw it as a career pathway for myself. I've been mostly doing a lot of acting, and mostly character acting is what my primary interest has been in. But in my voice acting class recently, the teacher, I was telling a couple of anecdotes, and he said, "Have you ever tried stand-up?" And it never really crossed my mind, but I had some time to kill, so I figured, what the heck, let's give it a whirl and see. It's definitely been an adventure.
Okay, well, that's great. I love the idea of going from stand-up to voice acting. No, from acting to voice acting to stand-up. What drew you to acting to begin with? I know a little bit of your history, but I'd love if you could talk a little bit about that. You were something else altogether, and then you became an actor. Please do talk a little bit about that.
So in college, at one point, I was like, there's no way I'm going to graduate. And it took me 5.5 years to graduate college. And what helped get me through it is a Tony-nominated director by the name of Bill Guile, who was a teacher at New Jersey Institute of Technology, got me into some acting classes because he saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself at the time. And as a result of my theater minor, that really would push me to finish my degree and get through it. And that's where I started taking I did about 8-9 plays at Rutgers University and NJIT. And then I stumbled into an editorial career because when you graduate with $60,000 in student loan debt, you're thinking that there's no way. I'm a realist. And I think, I was always raised that you got to focus on the plan B. So it was like, okay, you could focus on acting as a plan A, but what's your plan B? And then unfortunately the plan B takes a course of its own and becomes a plan A. And what wound up happening to me is I wound up in a 15-year editorial career as a senior editor, and I've been an editorial director at the WWE and stuff like that. And now I'm trying to go back to my passion and my original passion. I'm still passionate about editing, but there was something lacking that I wanted to get back into.
And I love how the original passion is performing. I'm the same way, only I think I'm a little bit older than you are, so it's really, it's fun to get to that point where you go, you know what? This is one life. It's both short and long, and I'm going to do something really fun with the rest of it. So I want to talk a little bit, if you don't mind, about this. We're airing our dirty laundry, right? So our instructor has said, make everything autobiographical. And it feels a little weird to me to talk about some of the stuff that is a little bit more vulnerable. Do you have that problem? And if so, how are you dealing with it?
I've always had a hard time making fun of people. I just, it's fine if you're making fun of your family in kind of a playful way, but sometimes I feel like I can't go that extra mile to a point where the joke may hurt somebody's feelings. So a lot of times I just make myself the butt of the joke because self-effacing humor I've always been fine with, and I've always been able to make fun of myself pretty easily. But But then, you kind of have to balance that. Well, not every joke has to just be making fun of yourself. People will just feel bad for you at the end of your set. So it's definitely been a struggle trying to be able to open up that way.
And it's funny because in that process of opening up, I feel like for myself, I'm having sort of an awakening of getting to the heart of my message, whatever that message is. Are you finding that that peeling the layers of that onion is working for you, sort of to get to the heart of what it is you'd like to say to an audience?
Yeah, I think so. I think the biggest thing is, when you're telling all the autobiographical stuff, it also has to be relatable in some way. So a lot of my set has delved into some strange medical ailments that I've had in the past, and the struggle is, is the audience going to find this relatable, or do I need to mix in some stuff that feels more on par with that? But I think the biggest thing is not forcing it, I think, and staying true to yourself and feeling like it's actually in your voice. I think I've written a couple of punchlines in the past that it felt like it felt a little forced, and it felt like, that's not me, or something that would come out of my mouth, so it shouldn't be in my set. But at the same time, finding punchlines that are more in line with you.
It's interesting that you said that finding punchlines that are more in line with you makes things easier. But I'm wondering also, as part of this, are you changing how you deliver the punchlines that you feel that work? Like in the class, I know we've heard a lot about that idea of write more punchlines. But what happens when you have a punchline that you think works, but you have to play with how you're going to deliver it to an audience and whether or not that audience will think it's funny? What's your process around that?
Yeah, I find I self-edit a lot, and then I hate a lot of my early punchlines because I feel like they're too logical, and that's something I still struggle with that. I try to look at, and I've watched a lot of stand-up comedy to try to gain some inspiration, and I think the most effective punchlines are kind of ones that you don't see coming necessarily all the time. There's a twist in some way, or it just doesn't feel like a logical conclusion of the joke you're trying to tell, and really just playing with it and being more creative. It's like Chris, our instructor, says, if this is true, then what is also true? And what is also true is the part I'm still struggling with. And yeah, a lot of it, like, it feels okay when I'm writing it down, but it's not like ha-ha funny. And sometimes you don't know until you try it out. But that's something I'm still struggling with, like you were saying, to get the punchline that it feels like it's in your voice, but it's also what it needs to be in order to get that big laugh.
And the audiences themselves are the judge, jury, and executioner, if you will. So it's going to be interesting to me when we have our class show to see how many of those jokes that we feel work really well maybe don't, and conversely, how many things we might say that we didn't even think might be that funny that the audience will find uproarious. It's almost like you end up developing a relationship with your audience in the moment and then figuring out later what worked and what didn't work. Does that daunt you at all, or do you feel pretty good about that idea?
Yeah, I mean, there's no way to know what the audience is going to look like during the class show. So they could come from a cornucopia of different cultures and backgrounds, and you don't know what might land and what might not land. The struggle we have in class is sometimes we're telling the same joke a bunch of times. So obviously, even if we tweak the joke, it's not going to get the same kind of laugh maybe it did the first time we tried it out. I think the idea of the class show, even as someone has done a lot of stage work, is very intimidating to me, because stand-up comedy is so intimate, and because you don't know, there's no way. One of my friends, when I was trying to get guidance, he's a colleague that has done various entertainment stuff and has done written punchlines before, had experience. I said, how do you know if a punchline works? And he says, you don't know until you try it out in front of a live audience. So I think the more practice we can get ahead of time, maybe trying it out on each other, maybe that'll help. But it's something might land and something might not land, and it's going to be definitely interesting.
It's the never-ending mystery of stand-up comedy. Something might land, something might not land. Tom, I can't thank you enough for joining me on the podcast. I'm looking really forward to the rest of the class and also to your set in our class show. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay, we're back, and I am super glad to have Brittany Raper back on the show. She was on the show last week, and I asked her specifically to come back to the show this week because we talked about something in class today that gave me pause, and our instructor Chris actually talked to Brittany about almost the same thing, and that is about the persona you have on stage. And when Brittany and I were talking about it, we sort of talked a little bit about the idea of your physical self and what that means and what you bring as part of your face, your body, your attitude, how you present yourself on stage, and what you bring to the stage as far as who you are, and what that means and what that does to your performance. So, Brittany, I'd love to get your thoughts on that idea on, first of all, what you heard in class as far as your persona and what you might want to do with the idea of your presentation moving forward.
Right, sure. Yeah, today we both kind of got comments about like how we're presenting ourselves on stage as stand-up comedians and like what our persona can be. And we were kind of asked to look into that a little bit more with ourselves and to play with it and figure out who we are as a persona. And I've always struggled with that in a way because I feel like I figured it out for acting. It took me a bit to figure it out, but I think for acting, I kind of found my niche and how I can marry comedy and drama and also like the ingenue look and the funny look and whatever. But for stand-up, it feels like a whole new game now. And just it's a tricky field in stand-up because it is, like we said, like there's no hiding behind a script. Like these are your words. This is your story. And sure, there's characters you can play as a stand-up comedian, but it's tricky because it's hard to be anything but yourself when you're telling the story of yourself. But that's also hard to come to terms with and hard to do. Yeah, that's kind of where we were at.
And it's interesting, if you have, I'm going to go there, Brittany, I'm sorry in advance. So if you have seen the show notes for last week's episode, or if you go to the show notes for this week's episode, you are going to see that Brittany is beautiful. Conventionally and otherwise, she's beautiful. She's very, very pretty. And the reason I am saying this, and she's like looking at me like, I can't believe you just said that. And now she's got her face in her hands. I love it. And now she's turning the color of the fire hydrant right behind her. This is great. No, the reason we're talking about this is because it is a touchy subject and it's weird and it's tricky to talk about because when you are pretty, beautiful, and I just heard somebody around the corner say super hot, so that was great. But yeah, when you are conventionally beautiful, you get all sorts of preconceived notions sort of placed on you, whether or not you wanted them, invited them, needed them, it doesn't really matter. In fact, I tell my husband, who is very handsome, he's 6'2", thin, blonde, blue-eyed, and looks like Alan Alda and Harrison Ford's love child, that it's very hard for him to be thought of as a dork. He's got a dork character, and it doesn't really work for him, I think, because he's so darn handsome. So when you have that disconnect, I think Brittany and I were just talking about the idea of accepting what it means as part of the persona that you bring on stage. So, Brittany, I'd love it if you would talk a little bit about, I know you said you figured it out with acting, but you're still struggling with it for stand-up. Can you talk a little bit about the struggle around characters like Sarah Silverman or Kristen Wiig or some of the other sort of conventionally pretty stand-up comedians and what they might have gone through, but also your own process around going through what it means to be conventionally pretty and at the same time trying to make your way in a field that doesn't always reward that.
Yeah, I wish I had all the answers for that. That's great. It's so weird. It's weird. You said it's weird to talk about, and I feel stupid like saying, having any say in the subject or whatever, or being considered to be part of that like conventionally pretty crowd or group of actors or whatever. And I mean, like when you said other comedians, I immediately think of Amy Schumer and how a lot of her material was about her struggles of not being conventionally pretty or being what men considered overweight, and like how she had to struggle or apologize for that to get what she wanted. And it's, I mean, we were also talking how there's pros and cons to however you look, right? And I feel weird complaining about, you know, being pretty or whatever, but one of the cons that happens is that like what I was saying is I don't like it when the first thing people see about me is that, oh, she's you know, blonde, blue-eyed, pretty, great, cool, we know her, done, we know her type. I don't like it when that's the first thing people see. I like it when people see the talent, the things I've earned, my talent, my work ethic, the things that I can point to parts of my life and prove that I know I'm good at these things, because I worked for them. I didn't work to be born with blonde hair or whatever, right? Like it's out of my control, so I really don't want to talk about it. I don't want it to be part of who I am, which is silly because it is. And so but then as we were talking, you were pointing out in my stand-up, I have my natural tendency is to kind of almost apologize for how I look and kind of go into myself and hope that no one notices. I hope that they can just see that I'm a smart writer, or hope that they can just see that I can be funny and write punchlines. When really that's not an honest way to be on stage. And I don't know who said it, but someone great said it, of an audience is smart. They can see when you're lying on stage. They can spot dishonesty a mile away when you're on stage. And I think that's going to be a really big challenge for me as I continue of, okay, how do I be a full, honest comedian, you know? And not in a like flouncy, oh, she's the pretty girl now kind of way, but just of, yeah, how do you authentically be yourself and authentically show people both the things you work for and the things that you have been given, things that are your control, and make beautiful, funny art about it. It's a challenge.
It's true, and it's really, I so appreciate everything you just said, because it, you know, that's so vulnerable, and it's so it's awkward to do what you just did 2 minutes ago and talk about your insides being almost the thing you want to show, but at the same time you end up hiding a little bit. It's incredible to see. That's pretty courageous. So thank you, Brittany, for doing that. But also, it struck me while you were talking that that's what we're doing with stand-up comedy. We're bringing out not so much here's our outside, even though that's the first thing people see, but we're bringing out the inside of us. You know, it's a little piece of my soul, is what you said last week in last week's interview. That's part of it, but it's here's my perspective on the world, what I think is funny, and I hope you think it's funny too. So I think I just swallowed a bug. I really do, and I'm a vegan. I really did just swallow a bug. Okay, so this is the strangest ending to a podcast recording ever, but you know, here I am trying to be poignant, and I just swallowed a gnat. That is just okay. So yeah, to get back to some semblance of order, I appreciate very much what you said about that, and the idea that you don't want to hide, you know, that you want people to see your full, authentic self. what do you think you might do moving forward to walk that path a little bit more truly?
Oh gosh, therapy? I don't know. Oh my gosh. Well, goodness, I did mention last week I want to write more personal jokes. And I think this is what I want to do about this is I want to write jokes about it. I want personally to laugh about it. I want other people to be able to laugh about it. And that's what I want to do.
And I think that means we're done. So see the show notes and look for Brittany's website, and you'll be able to go see her in her women's stand-up show, which is a week from today. Yeah, and I don't know if you can hear it because the water's running. We're doing this, by the way, this whole thing is being recorded at Simple Studio, where you might have heard opera or tap dancing or the water running because we're right near the sink. But the reason I wanted to say that is I want you to go see Brittany and hear her jokes and see how she writes jokes about what we just talked about, because I'm really looking forward to that myself. I hope you've enjoyed today's show. My name is Isolde Trachtenberg. This is I almost said the Creative Stand-Up Podcast again, the Creative Mindset Podcast. Isolde, think about this. You've only been doing the show for 280 episodes. You should know the name of it by now. But it turns out I don't. And of all things, I swallowed a bug. So I get a pass for everything today. So yeah, if you have questions for Brittany or Tom or Anthony, I would love it if you'd get in touch. If you like what you're hearing on the show, please consider leaving a review so I know what's going on in your mind as we move forward on this creativity journey together. Until next time, this is Isolde Trachtenberg, and I'm sending you all of my love.
Thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Please subscribe to the podcast if you're new, and please tell your friends about the community we're building here. Today's episode was produced by Isolde Trachtenberg and is copyright Isolde Trachtenberg 2019. Today's music was from Kevin MacLeod, Laser Groove, and Ave Marimba, brought to you by Creative Commons License 3.0. As always, please remember this is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Past performance does not guarantee future results, although we can always hope. Until next time, I send you all of my love.